Hey guys, welcome to yet another episode of the Scouting Report from the Vegona. We've got an exciting talent coming onto our show this time. So we're pleased to bring in Vishnu, who's a journalist by profession. How are you going, Vishnu?
I'm doing really well. Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, pleasure is ours, mate. Seriously, good to have you on board, especially one of those experts who can talk about a player in depth. And the player that we are going to talk about today is quite household name in the Arsenal transfer list these days. Is Gianluca Scamacca. He's been heavily linked with a lot of clubs, especially I've got a vested interest in Arsenal being a fan. So he's been heavily touted to come into Arsenal for the coming season. So we just wanted to profile the player to see what he brings into the team, what's his abilities like, and then what sort of player are we getting in terms, if and all we are going to be signing him. So let's get on to it. So Vishnu, so what do you think? I mean, Scamacca brings in. What makes him stand out? Obviously, apart from the height, he's 6'5". So apart from his height, what does he really bring into the team?
Yeah, so obviously when you look at him on the field, yes, as you mentioned, he's 6'5", and that sort of immediately gives you the idea that he's a target man, someone who's going to be lethal in the box from headers, from crosses, who can contest duels across the pitch. And that definitely is a big aspect of his game. But what makes him really unique is that he has these moments of skill and kind of unorthodox moments of touch and finesse that you wouldn't really associate with a player of his build. A lot of people compare him to Zlatan Ibrahimovic in that sense, because he's this huge guy, but he's unorthodoxly deft for a player of his profile. And so if you look at a lot of his finishes, yes, there are, headers and sort of moments of good movement in the box where he's able to create space and score, seemingly simple goals, but they're simple because he's able to be in the right place at the right time. But he also has these goals where, he's scoring half volleys, he takes a touch on the chest and just lathers it into the net, little chips. There's a lot of versatility in his finishing and in his play in the final third, which is something that is fairly unique for a player of his build, as I said earlier.
It's great to hear such an abilities in a young forward. Now, taking a step back, Vishnu. So, obviously, he's had a different, youth career or his progression so far, which is again unorthodox in many ways because Italians, especially, don't venture out of Italy, in playing their games. So this boy, he was early in his youth career. He belonged to the Lazio Academy, and then he switched sides to Roma, where he had actually gained a decent reputation. And that's when he chose to move out. I think maybe due to lack of games or something that he actually moved abroad to PSV, I believe. But then he quickly regretted his move and then came back to Giants as well. Also, how do you actually summarize the way that he actually he went along with this youth and to where he is at the moment?
Yeah, so it's, as you mentioned, it's quite unusual for particularly an Italian player to move abroad out of Serie A, and especially in the way he did it. So you mentioned that he went to PSV, he quite quickly returned to Sassuolo, but he wasn't really playing for Sassuolo a lot. He went on loan to Ascoli, a team in
Yeah,
Serie B, and then went on loan to Genoa,
yeah.
a team of a big history, but in recent years, lower league standing than Sassuolo. And this is really the first season where he's really impressed as a goal scorer. So last year, or sorry, in the 2020 to 21 season for Genoa, I think he scored about 9 goals in about 31 appearances.
8 goals in 29 games. So
Okay. So
considering Genoa are a defensive team, so they were obviously fighting for relegation. They were almost in the lower end of the league. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
no, not. I mean, yeah. So it's a good return, obviously, but I guess not something where you would say he's maybe of the level that could play for a club like Arsenal or some of the other clubs he's linked with. But this year for Sassuolo, he's really exploded as a goal scorer. But I think his time, away from Italy, I mean, I think that one says something about his character, right? The fact that he was willing to sort of take a risk that not many of his sort of compatriots are necessarily willing to take. It's not something that's very common in Serie A for him to do. He was willing to go abroad and then to go on all these loans in the search of more game time. And I think playing for a lot of these, a team like Genoa, like Ascoli, teams who don't dominate a lot of possession, who are quite defensive, where the scoring chances are limited, that really honed his hold-up play and made him really smart with how he uses his body. Because, like, for example, someone like Cristiano Ronaldo is a great player in the air, scores a lot of headers, but he's not someone who's going to, outside of that, really challenge for a lot of duels or be very, physically tough and abrasive in a certain way. Whereas Scamacca, playing for these kind of lower division side, developed kind of rugged, and almost like nasty quality to the way that he's able to play, which is a really big asset for the teams that he's playing for.
Okay. So we spoke about what he actually brings into the team. Obviously, when you look at the season which just went by, for Sassuolo, he didn't obviously start a lot of games at the start of the season, but then he gained the confidence and sort of got into the team or made it into the starting 11 almost, every game towards the end of the season. And he did score a lot of goals, 16 goals as such. So, that did show his character in terms of what he brings into the team. Now, coming to his abilities, I saw a lot of games where he's been quite prolific in his scoring. What really stands out, because he can, the way that I saw, he did score a lot of goals outside the box as well. So what sort of abilities that he have, mainly against teams who are set up very closely, as in like they are a tight-knit team sort of a thing?
Yeah, so I guess as you mentioned, he scores quite a few goals out of the box, and that's mainly because Scamacca takes a lot of shots. He's a very high shot volume for a striker, and that's generally a good thing. You want your striker taking shots, especially someone like Scamacca, because he's very powerful. If you look at his shooting technique, he's a very low backlift, so he doesn't take a lot of time to release his shots, which means that it's very difficult for defenders to close him down. But even with the very low backlift, he generates a lot of power. I believe there was a goal against AC Milan specifically.
AC Milan, right? Yeah.
He's about maybe 20, 25 yards out.
Wow.
And he just, it looks very effortless the way he strikes the ball. He absolutely caroms it into the top corner. And it was, again, you watch it and you're kind of at a loss for words as to how you just don't expect that kind of goal from a player like him. In terms of how, what he can do against defenses that are maybe sat a bit deeper, his aerial presence is probably the biggest asset there, and his movement. He's very intelligent with his movement. He targets the space sort of between center backs very intelligently. He'll time his runs very well to make sure that he's arriving to attack across at exactly the right moment. But he's also quite a versatile goal scorer. So, he's not particularly, explosive or very quick, but he's quite agile. He's good at sort of, accelerating and then decelerating or changing the directions of his runs. And what that means is that he can still be a threat in behind if you give him through balls. In transition, he's also still quite good. And again, I think his biggest asset against, if he were to move to a team like Arsenal, where a lot of teams are going to sit deep and try and compact space in the box, his biggest asset is just his physical presence just occupies defenders so much. Even if he's not, shooting particularly well on that given day, he's not getting into great scoring positions. He's such a physical presence, and his movement is quite intelligent that he drags, he creates space for others and is always sort of a constant threat for the opposition.
Nice. We spoke about his shooting abilities. Now, one of the things which baffled me when I looked at him or his stats for the 2021-22 season is his assists. He hasn't got even a single assist. Well, how do you summarize that?
I think it's really down to the kind of role he plays. You know, if you watch him, he will come deep to get the ball. That's normally either though with his back to goal. So he'll be holding the ball up with his back to goal to lay it off to someone else. Or if he comes deep for the ball, he wants to shoot himself. He's not the type of player who's really going to be looking to, you know, assist other teammates. And he's not a particularly good passer. He's not a very good ball carrier. Again, because of his height, it's difficult for someone like him to really control the ball at high speeds when carrying it. So what that means is really, you know, he's never really been tasked with being kind of an all-around creative forward. And his role is such that he doesn't really do that. Now, there are some target men, you know, like someone like Giroud, Olivier Giroud, who used to play for Arsenal, who will, you know, feed their opponents with knockdowns, you know, and be a bit more selfless in the way they play in the box. Scamacca hasn't really developed that yet. He's still, you know, I would say, you know, a goal scorer first and foremost, and that's maybe a bit limiting to his ability to create assists and opportunities for other players. But it is quite odd for, you know, a player of his level and his technical skill set to not get an assist. And you would suspect that maybe, you know, in future seasons he'd add a little bit more to that. But his role is such that it's really not a big focus of his play.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, so when you compare to the next highest scorer in the Serie A, you know, leaderboard, we've got Tammy Abraham there on 17 goals, but he's got a lot more assists. And even, you know, when you compare Scamacca against league's top scorers, Ciro Immobile, and then I can't remember the next one. I think his goals per minutes ratio is quite higher than I mean it's in the top 3 of Syria as such when you compare to the other strikers we have there. And that's where it brings me to the next question. So we do have another player who's again being touted by other clubs in the form of Raspadori in Sassuolo. How are they both different to each other within the team?
So Scamacca is very much a striker, right? You wouldn't play him in other areas of the pitch. And he does, you know, most of his damage. Yes, he takes shots and scores good goals from outside the area. But where he's really an asset to the team is in the opposition box. And of course, also one thing to mention about Scamacca is that he is quite good at leading a press, or in general, kind of working from the front defensively. He is someone who is willing to buy into that, which is something noteworthy. Raspadori, I'm less familiar with his play, but what I do know is that he's played wide a lot. He's played as almost a second striker.
On the left-hand side.
Yeah, on the left-hand side in a 4-3-3 or kind of a 4-1-4-1. And he's played, I think at times in his career, almost as like a second striker. Someone who's definitely more, you know, mobile, like a lot faster, you know, more acceleration, more speed in behind. So offers a different type of threat in that sense. Much better ball carrier. So someone who can really isolate an opponent one-on-one and, you know, pose a threat in that sense, and creatively contributes more, but certainly not quite the same goal scorer that Scamacca is. Doesn't bring the same type of aerial and physical profile that he does. So, you know, he's another very good player, and you know, throughout their history, Sassuolo have a track record of kind of developing really interesting players, but a very different type of attacker.
Okay. Sure. Coming to the Arsenal question. So why do you think Arsenal could go in for Scamacca, or why do you think Scamacca could more fit into an Arsenal team?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. Certainly in terms of the age profile, he suits Arsenal well, right? Arsenal, you know, have a lot of young attackers, 20 to 23-year-old range. And throughout the team, they're a very young team. So if they want to keep that profile, Scamacca definitely fits that, right? In terms of the age. He's definitely a very different type of striker to what they have currently. If you look at them in the past year with Lacazette and Nketiah, their main sort of remit has been to drop deep, to kind of make selfless runs, to drag, you know, the defenders away from the inside channel, to create space for players like Smith Rowe and Saka and Martinelli. And, the other main task has been to lead the press. So their job has not really been goal scoring primarily. But even then, like they've both, I guess, not maybe delivered as a goal scorer particularly. Even though that Arteta wants them to do these other things, he would still want them to contribute more in terms of goals. And Scamacca, I think the reason maybe why Arsenal are turning to him is maybe Arteta is thinking that he wants to sort of reorient his front line a bit, where he doesn't want a striker to drop deep, be creative, and kind of be a selfless player who creates space for others. He wants a striker now to be someone who can contribute a lot of goals and who can reliably pose as a threat to the team. The other thing that I think Scamacca brings that Arsenal don't have a lot of is physicality and aerial ability. Throughout that team, Arsenal are not an especially physical side. Obviously, Thomas Partey is an imposing presence in midfield. Gabriel is very good in the air. William Saliba, if he's reintegrated, brings those same qualities. But that's really it. And certainly in the front line, you look at Odegaard, Smith Rowe, Saka, these are all sort of quick, nimble, technical players, but not very physically imposing, not going to pose that kind of threat to teams. And I wonder if Arteta wants to kind of bring that element to Arsenal in a way that they haven't had that in previous years or in their existing setup.
Okay. If you were to compare, I know there are two completely different players, both Gabriel Jesus and Scamacca, with both of them being heavily linked with Arsenal. Who do you bring in and why?
I think I would bring in Jesus for a couple of reasons. One is that I think somebody is going to buy Gabriel Jesus this summer, and it looks like it'll be a Premier League club. Because obviously, Manchester City have purchased Julian Alvarez and Erling Haaland. And Jesus, I think he's 25. So he's, in terms of age, there's not really much of a concern there. And he fits the profile of what Arteta has had in a striker much more closely. So what I think in general, it means that Arsenal have to reorient their attack less, and they have to change less things by bringing Jesus in. If you bring Jesus into that team, what you're essentially getting is a better version of Alexander Lacazette. You're getting someone who can score more goals, but who can also be, more of a creative threat and be a better leader of the press. I think if you bring in Scamacca, it's more of a risk because you're asking the team to adapt to his strengths in a different way. Because if you ask Scamacca to play the same role as Lacazette, you're not going to get the best out of him. You're not going to get, the goal scoring that he can provide. I think that I wouldn't say that going for Scamacca is a bad move by any choice. As we've discussed, he's a very talented player. He's somebody who I think would adapt very well to the Premier League. But I think that, and so it really depends on what Arteta wants. If he wants to maintain essentially the same attacking structure, but just include a better quality player, I think Jesus is the right move. But I think if they want to do something a bit different, add a different level of aerial ability and physicality and more of a pure goal scorer, then Scamacca is the move for them. But I think that if I were Arsenal, I would probably go for Jesus, just because I think it'd be less of a transition and allow them to maybe, start the season really well and push for Champions League.
Totally. Just one final question on Scamacca as such. What's his attitude like? We know how he plays and all those sort of things. But in general, what's the boy's attitude like? Because I've read a lot of news about his dad and his granddad getting into, getting convicted for all these offenses and all those sort of things. I think his dad has caused a lot of ruckus in the Roma training ground sometime in the past. So he's had a very, although you could say that he's been growing up with his mom side of family, what's the attitude? He's obviously not the smoothest guy. You can see a lot of tattoos all around his body. So what sort of an attitude does he have personally?
Yeah, from what I've read and from what watching his body language in matches, he definitely has a bite to him, a certain aggression. He's quite a character, I guess you could say, both in the way he plays and in the way he carries himself on the field. I wouldn't quite say he's a leader. I don't think he's somebody who's really rallying the team around him, but he has a very strong personality. And I think that that can have quite a kind of galvanizing effect on the rest of the team. It can sort of uplift them and make them feel like, I don't know, there's sort of an extra layer, an extra motivation to playing with Scamacca. He plays with a certain edge. It's difficult to sort of describe in very tangible terms. But I think that I guess I could compare it to someone like Aaron Ramsdale, who Arsenal brought in, and you saw that yes, he improved the quality of their distribution. He's generally a good keeper, but he also plays with a certain personality, a certain kind
of riles up the opposition fans,
right. Exactly. He's not afraid to screw around with the opposition fans or with the opposition players. Scamacca, I'd say, brings a similar type of aggressiveness and kind of, he's not afraid to be unliked or disliked by the opposition. And I think that as a fan, that's almost another way that you really like him. He's the kind of player that you want on your team and would hate to be on the other side of.
Oh, nice. Awesome. No, I think that's perfect, Matt. I think I've covered enough in terms of what everybody wanted to know about Scamacca as such. Obviously, if in case it's going to materialize, then probably we'll profile him much more closer in terms of his goals and all those sort of things last season. But I think I've covered enough in terms of what I wanted to pick your brain on, Matt.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you very much. It was lovely chatting to you. And then, we'll hopefully chat in the future.
Yes.
Thank you. Cheers.